A life story about Hazel, a philanthropist, and an important person in a provincial town. The woman did not immediately achieve such a high position. At first she had a very hard time, especially in childhood, when she was still studying at school. Mockery and reproaches of classmates taught today's heroine a lot, and she was even grateful to them for such a life lesson. The beggar's daughter brought her son to a new school, and when at the reunion, her classmates saw a helicopter over the restaurant, they froze from shock.
Welcome back to Tales Tracks. I am excited to share a new story with you. Let's get started.
A woman in modest attire and a boy around 8 or 9 years old walked along the alley leading to the school. The woman appeared to be about 30, but the absence of makeup and her very understated clothing made her practically ageless. The boy beside her was also modest, tidy, and inwardly focused. They walked in silence, but it was the kind of silence that usually speaks of complete mutual understanding, where few words are needed. The school they were heading to was one of the most prestigious in the city, accustomed to seeing far more respectable students within its walls. Yet the woman and her son walked confidently, not at all daunted by the grandeur of the elite educational complex. This confidence confused the guard, who was about to call out to them to inquire about their purpose there, but ultimately remained silent, merely casting a disapproving glance at the visitors. "Hello, could you please tell me how to get to the principal's office?" the woman asked quietly but with great dignity. "And what is your business here?" the guard inquired rather coldly. "We recently moved to this area, and I want to transfer my son to this school," the woman continued calmly. "Many people want to come here," the guard smirked meaningfully, "but not everyone gets in. This is the best school in the city. Maybe it would be better if you didn't waste your time and went directly to the neighboring school." "Let me decide for myself where and in what order to address," the woman replied, softening her tone even further. "Please tell me where the office is. It wouldn't be right for us to search the entire school, and you have no right or reason to detain us." Straight through the hall and the second door on the left, the guard muttered through clenched teeth, unable to find a reason for conflict. "If they even accept you, that is." "Thank you," the woman replied, ignoring his unfriendly tone. She took the boy by the hand and proceeded to find the office. The principal's office greeted them with a leather sofa and a slightly open door from which voices could be heard. "Alexei, we are very grateful that you accepted him into the school. Studying here is such a high level. He is now one of the few lucky ones, and I am now confident about his future university admission," a deep, confident voice said. "Oh, there's still a lot of time before university. The boy is only 8, but I'm sure a son of such a father won't disgrace the dynasty." The principal was all politeness. "We need children like that. We will always find a place for them." After a brief farewell, a well-groomed man in an expensive leather jacket exited the office, and the woman with the boy entered through the door that hadn't fully closed. The principal gave them a brief glance, quickly removed a white envelope from atop a stack of folders, and, adopting a more official demeanor, dryly said, "I'm listening." "Hello," the visitor's voice was still quiet and gentle. "We would like to enroll in your school. We now live in this neighborhood." "Really?" the principal raised his eyebrows in surprise. "And what makes you think there are spots available here?" "You just mentioned it to the previous visitor," the woman replied. "That was just a figure of speech," the principal laughed. "By the way, what do you do for a living?" "I have an ordinary profession. I'm an accountant." An ordinary profession, an ordinary child. By the way, this school is only for the gifted. Practically everyone goes through a competition to get in. I think you should consider the neighboring school on Fructavia Street. They have a shortage of students. I think they will accept you." "But my child is gifted. He has a certificate of excellence in his studies and has won city competitions for the best drawing and essay. He can certainly be among your best students." The mother's voice began to rise subtly, with a hint of anger. "Well, whether he will or won't be, that's still up in the air." The principal straightened up, signaling that the conversation is over. The principal concluded firmly. "I strongly recommend you apply to the neighboring school, number 8, and I ask you to leave my office. I have many tasks to attend to." "You are unjustifiably denying us," the woman's voice took on a steely edge, "and unfairly discrediting my child." Sighing, The principal pressed a direct line button and said, "Kostya, dear, I need your help. This lady adamantly refuses to let me attend to my current duties and is beginning to raise her voice. I'll be waiting for you." Realizing that the same guard who had tried to belittle her at the entrance was about to appear at the office door, the woman flashed her eyes in anger and left without saying goodbye. Encountering the now panting guard in the reception area, she silently sidestepped and headed for the exit. "People have become so brazen," the principal grumbled. Summarizing the situation, "They think of themselves as the next Lomonosovs, no less," and carelessly shoved the white envelope into his desk drawer. A few days later, a phone call disturbed the quiet of the principal's office. Alexei picked up the receiver, and his face immediately took on a respectful expression. "Yes, Anatoly, I'm listening carefully. Alexei, our patron Hazel will visit you tomorrow. She will be overseeing all city schools, sports halls with exercise equipment, computer labs, and other modern innovations for the education system. She'll be at your school around 11. Please give her a proper welcome. She is our new partner." Lena, the principal's voice rang out loudly and demandingly, and a young secretary promptly materialized at his call. The mayor himself called. "Tomorrow at 11, we're welcoming an important figure regarding charitable aid. Prepare everything in the best possible way." The next day, exactly at 11, the secretary announced the arrival of Hazel. A young woman in an elegant olive suit and an ivory blouse appeared at the office door. Perfectly crafted pumps, embossed with a python skin pattern, and a clutch bag completed her refined look. Chestnut curls were swept into an elegant hairstyle, but her eyes looked cold and formal. "Hello, Alexei, may I come in?" Yes, of course." The principal stood up from his desk, scrutinizing the guest and trying to figure out why her face seemed so familiar. "I believe you have been informed about the purpose of my visit. I want to inspect the school's facilities and determine your primary needs with a special focus on inclusive education. My main principle is that education should be accessible to everyone, regardless of health or financial status. Do you agree with me?" The principal remained silent. He finally recognized the stylish, tastefully dressed woman as the same grey mouse who had recently tried to enroll her son in the school. Cunning, isn't she, he thought, trying to get in through the back door. As if I wouldn't have taken her child into the school with a mother like that. No, she had to put on a show and set me up. Now she's sitting here, mocking me. Why aren't you answering, Alexei? Or have you already realized that my son will indeed be studying in this school, but under a different principal? The principal gritted his teeth and silently began to gather the papers on his desk. The woman looked at him directly and dispassionately. "I have reviewed your service record. It mentions your experience in entrepreneurship. I think that experience will come in handy now, as dealing with children requires a fundamentally different approach than yours." With these words, Hazel left the office, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and a cursing principal. A few hours later, Hazel was sitting in her office, thoughtfully stirring a long, cold coffee with a spoon. All her visits and meetings for the day were over, and she could now think about personal matters. At the moment, the most pressing personal issue, nagging at her like a toothache, was the upcoming reunion of former graduates. She wasn't particularly keen on attending. It seemed that she was destined to receive nothing but negative impressions from this school. Not only had she herself endured humiliation, but now the voracious principal refused to admit Josh. Would she ever rid herself of her childhood complexes? So many years had passed, she was now a successful and well-off woman, yet the ghosts of her past still occasionally resurfaced, stubbornly and defiantly. It was these ghosts that had driven her to stage this charade with the school admission. She didn't want her son to end up in a snobbish environment and become one himself. If she had presented herself as she did today, Josh would have been admitted in a heartbeat. But no, she had to test the waters. If the system couldn't be broken, she had to at least try to remove a small part of it. Perhaps only those who have experienced it can understand. She had experienced it. Her young life was forever shattered by that out-of-control truck, a deadly weapon in the hands of a drunk driver, which crushed her young, athletic parents as they rode their bicycles along the roadside. Her father died instantly, but her mother. They had to put her mother back together, so to speak. Hazel barely remembered her mother's real face from old photographs. She remembered what had been reconstructed afterward, and her first childhood shock when, instead of her light-hearted, radiant mother, a nearly unrecognizable woman in a wheelchair moved into their apartment. Only her voice, her unforgettable mother's voice, allowed Hazel to recognize her former beautiful mother in this new person. Later, blindness had also set in. Her mother became more helpless than her own little daughter. Thankfully, their neighbor, Aunt Lucia, turned out to be a compassionate woman and, as she put it, took them under her wing. There was no one else to help. Her mother's parents had long since passed away, and her fathers were very old and lived on the other side of the country. So, little Hazel had to grow up much earlier than her peers. Her mother, ill and unfortunate, but with an unbroken spirit, did everything possible to survive and cause as little trouble to others as she could. She learned to navigate the apartment and perform most household chores by touch, managed her uncooperative and sluggish body, and even relearned how to laugh and joke. But often, not noticing her quiet daughter, she would cry silently, locked in her room. School. School became another significant challenge. Initially, in primary school, things were bearable. None of the children understood why Hazel didn't stay to play after lessons and hurried home instead, often going to the store or pharmacy instead of watching cartoons. But for a while, they left her alone. She didn't play, so what? Maybe she just didn't want to. Why none of the teachers attempted to explain her situation to the class was something Hazel still didn't understand. Yet, what was there to explain? The world was becoming increasingly selfish, and more often than not, people didn't care about those around them. Moreover, Hazel excelled in her studies, succeeded in all subjects, and gave the teachers no reason for concern. As the harsh and often cruel teenage years approached, the situation began to escalate. The brilliant student, whom the teachers held up as an example, already irritated her peers with her righteousness and detachment. On top of that, she started appearing in obviously outdated and shabby clothes. This was easily explained the childhood period when fashionable trends weren't as pronounced, and clothes, due to children's rapid growth, still looked presentable after being worn, was over. Now, generous people donated fewer items to her unfortunate family, and those that did come were much more worn out. Hazel gradually but firmly acquired the reputation of a beggar with all the ensuing consequences. Back then, the term bullying wasn't widely known, but it didn't change the essence of what was happening. The mockery, taunts, and hurtful nicknames became more frequent and sophisticated. The situation worsened when her classmates discovered that Hazel helped the lame janitor, Uncle Arseny, after school. Uncle Senya, another kind soul on her difficult path. The destitute often come to aid in tough times quicker than the well-off. Arseny, who had neither home, family, nor substantial possessions and struggled with the demanding job of a janitor due to his injury, always tried to help the smart little girl and her sick mother in any way he could. It felt uncomfortable to simply accept help, so Hazel began assisting Uncle Senya by sweeping the yard. At first, the man chewed his lips and frowned, but then he declared that his task was now easier and that all work deserved a salary. His statement made sense, and from that point on, twice a month during advances and paydays, a few crumpled bills would invariably find their way into the small palm of the girl. Her classmates didn't notice Hazel at this task immediately. They all loved to sleep in, while she got up to help Uncle Senya as early as 5 in the morning. But one day, everything aligned. She was delayed, gathering fallen leaves into piles, and Vova's spaniel inconveniently needed a walk at an ungodly hour. That day, the class had no lessons. Everyone was busy showcasing their wit. Hazel heard a lot, from almost harmless prospects of flying on a jet broom to the deeply hurtful "Go away, beggar, you smell like garbage." Yes, children can be very cruel. That day she wanted to cry loudly and openly, but she couldn't. At school she had to avoid giving her peers any more reasons to mock her, and at home she had to avoid upsetting her mother. Hazel shielded her mother from these troubles, telling her about a friendly class, wonderful peers, and an idyllic school life. It had to be this way. Otherwise, her mother would cry helplessly and then respond in monosyllables or remain silent for days. So it was better to fantasize and almost believe at that moment that she indeed had this second, blissfully joyful and wonderful school life. Hazel sipped her now cold and tasteless coffee. Vivid images of her difficult and half-forgotten childhood unexpectedly resurfaced. Bob. He was the only one who dared to break the collective ostracism when she, Hazel, was not allowed to participate in a physical education class due to the lack of a sports uniform. Her old one had become hopelessly small over the summer, and she had only managed to save enough money partially for a new one. The money saved from skipping school lunches and from Uncle Senya's modest rewards was only enough for new sneakers. She had to make do with jeans and a t-shirt instead of a proper sports suit, but that wasn't acceptable. Vladimir, a retired military man and now a physical education teacher, maintained a reverent attitude towards uniforms in all their forms. What kind of masquerade is this, she heard during the very first lesson. Shrugging, the girl stood silently in line with her classmates, who were already accustomed to laughing at her. Step 2 paces out of line, commanded Vladimir in a military tone. Hazel complied. Now, explain to me, where is your sports uniform? The gym teacher asked. I changed into my sneakers, the girl tried to justify herself. That's wonderful, but how do you plan to perform high jumps and beam exercises in that get-up? He sneered, pointing dismissively at her jeans. Or do you think you'll just sit on the bench? I'll do everything, nothing will stop me, Hazel flared up at that moment. I will decide what prevents you from doing exercises and what doesn't, Vladimir declared and added imperiously. Leave the lesson, and you can return when you're in proper uniform. Lowering her head amid the giggles and taunts of her classmates, Hazel exited the gym and sat on a bench in the lobby. The prospect of acquiring a school uniform seemed quite bleak. It would take at least a quarter to save up for it, and she certainly didn't want to fail physical education due to absences. Unable to find a way out of the situation, the girl hugged her school backpack and began to cry. Why the tears when there's no rain? She heard a voice above her and looked up. Standing over her was Bob, a joker and a mediocre student who often skipped classes. He kicked me out, Hazel sobbed. He said not to come at all without the uniform. Is that all? Why are you crying then? You'll come next time in uniform. For now, how about getting some ice cream? Ice cream? What uniform? Where am I supposed to get the money for all this? Bitter tears flowed anew. Look, friend Bob's backpack plopped down next to Hazel on the bench. Tears won't help. So what's the deal? Are you really struggling? Yes, Hazel nodded gloomily. I grew a lot over the summer, and I can't afford to buy everything at once. Well, I can't promise a complete outfit, but I'll get some leggings from my sister. She just bought new ones for college. She'd better share if she doesn't want me to tell our parents that she skips classes for dates, Bob said confidently, patting Hazel on the shoulder. Come on, let's get some ice cream. My treat. Thus began their childhood friendship, which gradually blossomed into their first love. Bob indeed brought the leggings, along with a few other items from his sister's wardrobe, and he even showed up to the physical education class to back Hazel up if necessary. But there was no need for an argument. The leggings were satisfactory, and the gym teacher allowed Hazel to participate in the high jump. Bob seemed to enjoy doing good deeds and took Hazel under his informal protection from that day on. He would hush overly critical classmates, secretly put pastries from the school cafeteria into her backpack, and often waited for her in the schoolyard to walk home together. Bob turned out to be quite an interesting conversationalist with his own unique perspectives, often at odds with the teachers, and completely unafraid of life's realities. With him, Hazel felt calmer and more confident, and sensing his protection, classmates abruptly reduced their teasing, transitioning to a phase of lukewarm disapproval. Gradually and imperceptibly, the final year of school approached, bringing with it significant anxieties. Her grades remained excellent. She was even on track for a silver medal. However, preparing for the graduation ball posed real problems. Money for gifts to the school, teachers, and the festive banquet was simply non-existent. Hazel wasn't particularly keen on the banquet anyway, realizing that aside from Bob, no one would likely invite her to dance or enjoy the sunrise in the park together. But she desperately wanted to receive her diploma in a fancy dress, much like Cinderella at her first ball. Yet there were no fairy godmothers among her immediate circle, not even Bob's older sister, who never wore dresses and only had an assortment of various pants in her closet. Thus, on the day of graduation, Hazel quietly persuaded the deputy principal to give her the diploma before the festivities began and, upon returning home, laid down on her bed in her room, burying her nose in the pillow. Around 9 in the evening, a flat pebble fell onto the windowsill, and looking out, she saw Bob in a light grey suit with a slightly askew colourful tie. "Let's go greet the sunrise," he proposed without preamble. "But what about everyone else?" Hazel asked, realising that Bob had no intention of returning to the banquet. "They're already celebrating in champagne splashes, as if it's not an ordinary graduation, but the last day of Pompeii," Bob answered mockingly. "Grab a windbreaker, we'll take a boat ride." It was an unforgettable night. First, they strolled along the embankment, then kissed in a half-ruined gazebo, and as dawn approached, Bob, after persuading a sleepy guard at the boat station with a moderate fee, got them a boat off hours. They greeted the sunrise in the middle of the river, sitting in the gently swaying boat, nestled against each other, watching as the first rosy rays confidently pierced the darkness of the departing night. She was on cloud 9 with happiness then. Could her graduation have been so wonderful if she had been amidst the crowd in the banquet hall like everyone else? How fortunate that she didn't have a dress but had Bob and this incredible summer night and sunrise in a slightly rocking boat. Back then, it seemed like all the hardest parts were behind her. She would start working, she would have Bob, there would finally be money at home, and maybe she could even enroll in correspondence courses. But life had other plans for Hazel. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. Bob was by her side, she found a decent job as a secretary in a stable firm, and her mum cheered up. However, the cloudless streak didn't last long. Her beloved was called up to the army, and Hazel discovered she was pregnant. It was like a thunderbolt on a clear day, sudden and deafening. A tear-soaked letter with news of impending fatherhood flew off to the military unit, and sometime later, a reply and a money transfer arrived. The response stated that having a child was wonderful, but in the current situation where the father served and the mother had no means of support, the appearance of a new life was premature and frivolous. Therefore, the translation involved covering the cost of terminating the pregnancy. The letter burned her hands, her eyes refused to believe what was written, and her mind refused to comprehend it all. To terminate the child? Their blood, hers and Bob's? What had they done wrong? That they were both young and inexperienced. And what if she couldn't have any children after this? Raised by a strict and devout mother, Hazel categorically could not make such a choice and feverishly tried to think of anything that would allow her to survive this situation. In this state of paralysis, she was discovered by her boss, who returned to the office for his forgotten mobile phone. Shocked by the devastated look on his secretary's face, he approached her desk quietly and, wanting to get her attention as she stared blankly into space, gently tapped the edge of the cup standing on the table with a spoon. Hazel startled, and her boss asked, "Are we facing a war or the end of the world?" Seeing that Hazel didn't understand him at all, he explained, "Only in such cases is this such an expression on the face of a young and charming girl justified." It was then that Hazel blurted out that she wasn't just a young girl, she was already a pregnant woman who soon wouldn't be so charming anymore, and that perhaps William should find himself a new secretary, because she, Hazel, would soon be unfit to perform these duties. The outburst of emotions opened the floodgates, and her angry cry turned into desperate hysteria. William, not one to shy away from tough situations, first let her cry and then, seeing that the situation was worsening, slapped her cheeks and poured half a glass of cold water on the sobbing and unnatural laughter of the girl. "William, the mercy of God to me. How timely you returned to the office." Then Hazel squeezed the coffee spoon in a burst of emotion, causing it to bend. Memories of her late husband resounded with piercing pain in her heart. Hazel herself, a true product of William's love, understanding and titanic effort. It was he who had supported her shoulder, increased her salary, and provided bonuses. It was he who took her to doctors and stood outside the maternity hospital when Josh was born. It was he who later visited her and unconditionally took her to his home after her mother's death. William also pushed her to study through distance learning and slowly introduced her to the intricacies of his business, as if sensing his imminent departure. And how did she manage to hold on when an unknown car hit William's car from the side and drove away, leaving William rolling down a cliff in a burning car? Business is a cruel thing. Competitors did manage to snatch a major project at the cost of William's life, but otherwise she stood firm, with her husband's assistants proving to be loyal people. By the way, William would not have approved of her current reflection. Indeed, he did not invest so much effort in her, so that she would remain in her soul still a frightened girl ashamed of her poverty. The bent spoon lay on the table. The decision was made. Hazel found the restaurant's contact information and made a call. "Hello, is this Restaurant Monaco? Could you please confirm if the deposit for the banquet on the 25th has been made? No. Please send me the details and the amount. Yes, I will also settle the final payment. Thank you, awaiting your response. Well, the first part of the plan is completed. It's time to move on to the most interesting part. Surprises are always welcome at celebrations. I wonder who thought of inviting her, the former outcast, to this gathering. It must be Bob." On the appointed day, former classmates, now accomplished men and women, lively conversed in the elegant hall of the restaurant. Discussions were animated. Glances assessing everyone was curious to learn what each had achieved over the years and to see how much the boys had matured and if the girls had not lost their charm. Hazel had not yet arrived by the start of the banquet. However, this didn't concern anyone much except for a young, fair-haired man in a tweed jacket who kept discreetly glancing at the door without attracting attention. Amid the debate over who this benefactor was, who had paid for such an expensive reunion in the restaurant, a strange roar was suddenly heard outside, growing louder and closer. Intrigued classmates rushed to the windows and saw a helicopter preparing to land on the VIP platform. Well, it seems we're about to find out who this Monte Cristo is, remarked Sveta, the main instigator and, consequently, one of the main bullies from school. The helicopter landed gracefully, the door opened, and a petite woman with chestnut hair emerged. The stranger headed towards the entrance of the banquet hall, and curious glances could make out her tall hairstyle with casually tousled strands, an elegant dusty pink dress with flowing ruffles at the bottom, and glimpses of graceful stiletto shoes peeking from under her dress. "Who is that?" exclaimed Sveta in surprise, unaware that her long-time crush Bob was staring fixedly at the stranger, struggling to swallow his suddenly thickened saliva. Meanwhile, the beautiful woman entered the hall and approached her former classmates, extending her hands. "Well, hello, friends. Don't you recognize me?" A tense silence fell over the room. Some still didn't recognize her and peered closely, while others had already guessed and were trying to comprehend. Sveta, the instigator, was the first to speak up. "Did you manage to rob a bank or something?" "Well, then I would have been running away, rather than showing up at a classmates' reunion." Hazel chuckled nonchalantly. "And why is everyone standing?" The table is already set. The stunned crowd gradually dispersed to their seats, trying to digest the shocking turn of events. The banquet continued in complete silence. No one knew how to proceed after such an unexpected entrance. Stories of personal achievement seemed entirely out of place against the backdrop of Hazel's spectacular transformation from rags to a socialite. The prolonged silence was broken by Hazel herself. She raised her glass and requested a moment to propose a toast. "I deeply regret not arriving in time for the beginning of our gathering and hearing what you all shared about your 10 years since school. However, I hope to catch up on that. As a latecomer, I'll tell you about myself first. Firstly, I sincerely want to thank all of you for the rather tough school of life that I had to go through in childhood. It is precisely this experience that gave me resilience and strength of spirit to endure after my husband's death, the machinations of competitors, to handle my grief with dignity, not to complain, not to give up. Not to lose myself, but to steadfastly and stubbornly continue his work, and even succeed in it. Yes, I am now a widow, but I have a wonderful son who will now also enter our school. I have the opportunity to help our school and many others with the limited means I have. Any experience is invaluable, even the negative, and I thank you for being my teachers, even unknowingly. I want to congratulate all of you on this gathering and wish you not a smooth life, unfortunately. That's impossible, but strength of spirit and determination in achieving your goals. May your goals always be significant, worthy, and make this world a little better." Hazel raised her glass, and in the dead silence, timid claps were suddenly heard, then picked up by this previously unfamiliar and unfriendly class, applauding the fragile woman in a dusty rose dress, still holding her glass hesitantly and shyly. The atmosphere lightened, conversations and reminiscences resumed, and Hazel, finishing her champagne and reclining in her chair, realized she had conquered even this challenging height. Music started playing, and Bob emerged as if from the ground beside her table, inviting her to a slow dance. Another round echoed in Hazel's mind as she went to dance. Salvatore Damo's voice, emerging from a distant past, enveloped, soothed and allowed for a salvific silence. Bob couldn't hold back any longer. How old is your son? 8 and a bit. Hazel didn't lie to her former lover. So you didn't terminate the pregnancy. Why? Well, you see, in my house we didn't even like to kill flies, let alone children. My mum and I just created a really strong draft and they flew away on their own. How can you kill a part of yourself? Honestly, I still don't quite understand it, although I've seen all sorts of things in life. By the way, I'm very grateful to you for that letter with the translation. If not for it, I would never have known that there could be a very strong and loving real man nearby. And although we didn't live together for long, I will cherish this memory as the brightest and dearest thing in my life. I would like to see. My son Bob looked at the floor, hesitating to look up at Hazel. Why? He loves and remembers his father, and your appearance won't change that. Children are not inclined to compromise, unlike me. He won't forgive you once he learns the truth. Do you want to teach him hatred? I can't allow that. You made your choice back then. Every choice has consequences. Hazel, I never managed to forget you. Bob's voice was hoarse, strained. That's why I tracked you down, to invite you to this meeting. I understand. Bob. Hazel suddenly felt how tired she was and how unnecessary and futile this conversation and belated remorse turned out to be. But you know, one can't step into the same river twice. Something in me burned out back then, along with your letter, like a reinforced door closing. Don't be upset. I think I'll head home now. The restaurant's paid for. Enjoy yourselves until you're tired. I have to visit schools again tomorrow. Then the mayor's office. Goodbye, Bob. With these words, Hazel walked lightly towards the exit. I've handled this round too, she told herself as she stepped outside, letting the refreshing evening breeze cool her face.